copy activities. The advanced setting within the copy activities with respect to query timeouts, how can we isolate, the concept of mapping, and how we can have dynamic mappings, wherein via dynamic content I can add whatever is the mapping that is present as a part of JSON, I can add it under the dynamic content. In that way, we can create a metadata driven framework, meaning rather than hard coding every source and sink and providing the explicit mappings, what we can do is parameterize it and leverage the same logic in an iterative way. That is what we call as a metadata driven framework. Then we saw across the settings with respect to what is fault tolerance, what is the purpose of fault tolerance, and how that data gets preserved in the form of text files. And then in case if you have a need of further copying it into some location, you can copy it from the text file into the respective location as well. Then we also briefly discussed the concept of gateway, wherein imagine that if your data, if your source or destination is hosted somewhere within a virtual network, be it on premises or an infrastructure that is bound within a virtual network. In that case, Azure Data Factory is on public internet. So for that, it does not have access to directly bypass the source. So in that case, there is a need for a bridge to be created between that source or a sink and the Azure Data Factory. So that bridge is what we call as an on-premises gateway. But Microsoft has also introduced something called as VNet data pipeline as well. So there is another aspect, and we'll understand the difference in the coming sessions. We also took a look with respect to different type of activities. Some of those activities include iterative activity like for each. So for each is similar to the for each aspect that you all use within your coding aspect, wherein you can define the fixed number of iterations that we have. And then via that fixed iteration, you can either make the iteration parallel or sequential based on the corresponding settings. Depending on that, we identified that there is a set variable activity and append variable activity. Now, set variable activity overrides the variable value in every iteration, whereas append variable appends the values in the array variable itself in successive or any iterations. So in case if you have to preserve the previous set of variable values, then you would be leveraging append variable activity. Wait is for us to wait for a specific duration of time. Fail is in order for you to explicitly throw an error. We identified different types of dependencies and how we can manage different type of dependencies, the combination of and or. So dependency via different activities to one activity is in the form of and, meaning it should be this and this. But dependencies of the same activity with another activity work as an or. So it is either this or this. Now, one of the limitations within the data pipeline is earlier, around 7 months back, the limitation was you can only have maximum of 40 activities within a single pipeline. Meaning these activities that are present here, I can only have 40 activities maximum in a single pipeline. But now 6 months back, 6 to 7 months back, Microsoft has increased this limit from 40 activities to 80 activities. You cannot go beyond 80 activities. The pipeline, the JSON validation would fail. So now we would be covering some of the other activities in detail. Now the stored procedure activity is a simple activity that is used to trigger a stored procedure from the respective databases, be it Fabric Warehouse, Azure SQL database, etc. Now, in case if you use a stored procedure activity, now stored procedures are of two types. One is for execution and one is some of the stored procedures do provide us with some output. Now, in case if you need the output of the activity to be present and used across further, you cannot use stored procedure activity. Stored procedure activity is just to trigger the stored procedures. You cannot get any output from that. When I say output, what exactly do I mean by that? So let's take an example. Correct. Let me use this copy activity here. Let me again run this pipeline. So now it's executing this copy activity. Parallelly, by the time that is getting executed, let me declare another variable. Variable variable activity output of type string. Okay, so the copy activity got succeeded and I can see that there are these many rows red. Correct. Now, for now, I declared a variable of activity output and let me make it of type string. Now, imagine that I want to capture the output of this copy activity, which is I want to capture how many rows were red. This is one of the log value, correct? So imagine that if I want to capture how many rows were red, then let's use the set variable activity. Let's link it. Let me call the variable activity output and let me assign the dynamic value. Now, if you see in the activity output, since I've linked it, I am able to see this activity output is available for me. But now the activity output had multiple values. Correct. So in case if you all see, when I select output, output means I'll be able to get all these details. Correct. But I want only specific detail with respect to the rows red. So how to go across with that scenario? So as of now, I have only declared till dot output. Correct. Now let me execute this. Now this activity would fail because the output is of type object, and we will understand what I mean by that. Let's wait for a couple of minutes for this to execute. Okay. Now if you see the error message, it states that the variable activity output of type string cannot be initialized or updated with the value of type object, because the output here is not a specific string. Correct. It's an object. So I have to capture the specific value within this array. So let me copy the functionality. So I want within that output, now output dot rows read, meaning I want to read the rows read functionality within that output. So you have to go granular within that. I hope you all are able to understand. The output was capturing the overall value of the output. But I want to capture a specific subset of that output. Hence, we have to go granular within that. So by the time this would get executed and it would take some time. Now again, this failed because the variable cannot be initialized or updated with the value of type integer. So since it's an integer value, I have to declare the variable of type integer now and execute it. So any queries up till now? Yes or no?
No, Nanda.
So this is for single like variable, right? What if like one more we want to like get the output?
When you say you want to get more output, can you be more specific?
Yeah, like just you like we extracting only read, okay?
Correct. You can
One more,
basically,
yeah.
you can specifically select data.read, data.return, files read. Correct.
Uh-huh.
So what you can do is rather than using set variable activity here is just for me to debug and show you as the reference.
Okay,
Correct.
okay.
But you can directly use it as an input for any other activity. So imagine that you have created a stored procedure. Correct. Now the stored procedure can have multiple parameters, input parameters. So for every input parameter, you can provide this as the value.
Yes.
And then that stored procedure can capture all the logs in a destination Azure SQL database as per your choice. Correct? So it depends on how you want to manage your logging framework. So now if you check the output, okay, it was set variable 2, correct? I can see 2, which is equivalent to the value of the copy activity. Rows read. Now imagine if I want the data read, I can replace it with, rather than output dot rows read, I can replace it with output dot data read. So now this would capture me the corresponding value of the same. Any queries up till now? Now by the time that is getting executed, let me create another pipeline. So now up till now we were able to capture the output, meaning the logical output logs. Correct. Now imagine that I want to capture an error message. So let me first use a set variable activity. Correct. Now let me declare two variables. One is var set and another is var error. And here let me declare it of type integer. Let me declare a parameter No need of parameter. Let me hard code the var. Okay, let me declare a parameter of type integer var1. Let me provide a default value. In set variable 1, for var set, it's of type integer. I'll provide this value of parameter 1. Now, let me first make it of type string. Now, in case if I execute this pipeline, this would fail, stating that string to int conversion would happen. The variable var set of type integer cannot be initialized or updated with the value of type string. Now imagine that in the output, am I able to see any error message pertaining to this activity now? No, correct. So I want to capture this error message that is present here. So how to capture that error message now? So for that, let me pull in another set variable activity. See, remember, it's not just set variable activity that you need to use, correct? Any dynamic values that we are generating that can be used for any other activities. Now, those activities are used to copy or do something aspect. But for debugging purpose, it's the set variable activity via which I set the variable, check whether my dynamic expression is proper or not. And based on that, then I leverage that dynamic expression further in my aspect and get rid of the set variable activity. So now I want on completion, meaning I want to capture the error messages. Correct. So completion and failure, irrespective of whatever, I want to capture the error message if there is any. Correct. So for that, let me use the set variable activity var error. Now I want to capture the error message of the activity. So how to do that? So the activity that is at the rate activity name. Correct. Now, why am I not able to see any activity name here? Any guess? See, in the earlier aspect, I was able to see the activity name. Correct. But now, here I am not able to see any activity names. Any specific reason why?
There is no output like that. Finish.
Because it's a set variable activity.
Yes.
Correct. Set variable activity does not have an output because it is setting up the variable value. So it's the variable value that I would pick up as the output itself. Correct. There's no need of separate output. But what if I have to capture the error message of any activity? So at that time, the syntax is at the rate activity and provide the activity name. So what is my activity name? It's set variable 1. Correct. So set, okay, so it is without space. Set variable 1. So activity at the rate activity name dot output dot errors, or you can leverage error message. Correct. Now imagine that I might have multiple errors. Correct. An output can have multiple error messages in the form of array. But if you want to capture a specific one, then error dot message. Okay. So now in case if I try to run this, stating that the output of cannot be referenced since it has no output. Let me not confuse you all with a complex example here. Let me start with a simple one. So let me first make it of type integer itself. Now, the problem is it's stating that there is no output which can be referenced here. But ideally, what I'm doing is I'm trying to capture the error message. Is there a scenario that whenever there is an error, would there be an output associated with that? Imagine your copy activity is failing. So would there be an output, anything that would be visible in the copy activity? No, correct?
No, yeah.
So this is an ambiguity aspect, correct? Hence, it is not output that we would be needing since I'm trying to capture the error message here. So it would be @activity name dot error dot message. And in certain cases, it would be dot output dot error dot message, depending upon the type of activity. So depending upon the syntactical type, in case of copy activity, you saw, correct? There was activity dot output. So in that case, it would be dot output dot error dot message. But in certain activities like set variable, wherein there is no output that is present, it would be dot error dot message. So now let me go back and make it of type string. And now let me run this. But before running, see, it won't proceed, correct? I want to make it on completion. The run after property. Okay. I forgot to delete on success. It's a duplicate value. I hope you understood the previous message, correct? I had kept it on success and on completion, correct? On completion meaning either success or failure. So by default, there was a duplicate aspect that was being present. And now, even though an activity failed, the overall pipeline status was succeeded because there was only one path. And in that path itself, the next subsequent activity was successful, even if the previous activity was a failure. So it is like a try-catch scenario, and hence the overall pipeline was successful. Now, if you see the error message, this is the error message. The variable var set of type integer cannot be initialized. Now, in the set variable activity, if you check the output, I assigned the error message to it. The variable var set of type integer cannot be initialized or updated with the value of type string. So this is how we capture the error messages. That is dot activity name dot error dot message. Now, unfortunately, the activity name cannot be made dynamic. It has to be hard coded because the activity names are hard coded. So that's one aspect that has been a feedback since last couple of years with Microsoft, but I don't see any output pertaining to that. So imagine that if you have 40 different activities, So to capture the error message of every activity, you have to explicitly mention @activity, the activity name, .error.message. Now, let's change the scenario a bit. Rather than of type string, I'll make it of type integer. And now I'll execute the pipeline. So now the set variable activity would be successful. Correct. So in case if the set variable activity is successful, then would there be any error message pertaining to that? No, correct? Since there is no error associated with this set variable activity, my set variable activity 2, that is capturing the error message, would fail, stating that the expression .error message cannot be evaluated because property message cannot be selected because there is no error. The error output is null. So within that null, if I'm trying to get the corresponding message value, it would state that there is no such property and it would fail. So in such scenarios, does it mean I always have to, rather than on completion, I always have to make it on failure itself? Is this the only way to manage the error messages? Any thoughts? Is the question clear? What we are trying to identify? So basically imagine that I have 40 different activities, correct? So if, and this is pertaining to one of the case study that I had provided, wherein iterate the count of the corresponding iteration and at the end send a failure notification and capture the error message of each and every activity. So those who have completed the case study, depending on today's scenario, work on some enhancements on your existing logic. So imagine I have 40 different activities. I have to capture the error message of every activity. So does it mean I duplicate it, meaning on aspect of every set variable activity, I do an on failure only and manage it? Manage the set variable activity, meaning I'll be doubling the number of, I'll double the number of activities. Is that the correct architect design? No, correct. So without on failure, is there any way to still execute this, meaning on completion? So there is a concept called null if parameter, meaning in this output or in this expression, I just add a question mark. This is null if parameter or null safe parameter, meaning what it would do is this question mark, in case if there is an error value, if this activity dot error is not null, then proceed ahead, else stop here itself. So in this case, what would happen is, since the set variable 1 is successful, so there is no error, meaning this is null, so it won't proceed ahead and hence it won't fail. So now, in case if I execute this again, can you see the set variable 2 got executed successfully, but the value associated with the set variable is null because there was no error message only. But imagine that if there is an error, in this scenario, there would be an error. But because of that null safe parameter, it first checks whether the dot error has some value or not. So in this case, it would have an error value and hence it would proceed to the message aspect. So because of that, it proceeded to the message and it captured the message. So this is how we would be capturing the error in case of null safe scenarios. So any queries on the concept of how you can use dynamic expression to leverage the output of one of the previous activities into the next subsequent activities. Yes or no?
Yes, Nandan.
Okay.
Yes, Nandan.
No.
Okay.
So now we covered the how to pass expressions and how to capture the error messages and how to use the null safe expressions. Data flow activity is in order to trigger the data flow Gen 2 that we would be covering in subsequent sessions. Delete data is to delete the specific file from the specific location. Now, invoke pipeline let's take a look with respect to the web activity. Now, if you all remember, I had said there's something called as APIs or web URLs. Correct? Now imagine if I have to trigger something from the web URL and capture the data, like in this case. Correct? So this is an HTTPS URL. Now I want to capture the data that is present in this URL. Meaning, in case if I hit this URL, I'm able to see some data. I want to extract this data into my ecosystem. So for that, there is something called as REST web activity. So for web activity, I have to create a connection. Since I do not have any existing connection, I'll have to create a new connection. So I'm selecting a new source. Now I have to provide the URL that I want to click on. Correct. So in this case, this is the URL that I want to get the data. Now this token audience is basically the resource URI. If you all remember the concept of REST APIs that we had seen while generating the case insensitive fabric warehouse. So at that time, I had to provide a REST API URL and I had to provide a URL that was specific to Microsoft Fabric ecosystem to generate OAuth token. But since this is not a REST API, this is a normal HTTP site. So there is no resource URI. Hence, this is not a mandatory aspect. And since this URL is a public URL that I'll provide in the chat, which you all can leverage for your own POC purpose. Since this URL is publicly accessible, meaning there is no authentication needed. Hence, it is of type anonymous. Anyone can go and access it. Ideally, in any organization aspect or REST API, you would never be using anonymous aspect. You would be using other types of authentication. And that other types of authentication we would see at the end stage of automation via REST APIs. But in order to understand the normal concept of the web activity, we need the URL from which we want to extract the data, and we need to select a type of authentication. Since this URL is publicly accessible, hence there is no authentication involved, hence it's of type anonymous. And as I said, in case if this URL is hosted within some network, you would need an on-premises data gateway or a VNet data gateway. So now I'll connect it. Now this relative URL is for some advanced parameterization aspect that we'll check in the case of automation use cases. But for now, let's keep it simple. Now, there are different methods of API. We'll discuss in detail in the automation aspect, but for just a layman aspect, it's different type of aspects that you are trying to do on the web URL. So in this case, I want to get the data from that URL. Correct. Hence, I'll be using the get API method because I want to get the data. But imagine if I want to delete some data. then I'll be using the delete command. But here I want to get the data. Now I'll execute this pipeline. So web activity is an activity that is used to trigger the processes that we want to do on the respective APIs or URLs. So if you see, I am able to get the corresponding output that is associated with this URL. Correct? I'm able to see multiple other aspects. But imagine if you want to get the specific data of the CSV file. Correct? How to do that? So in that, you go across some of the additional aspect pertaining to the advanced layer within the reference that has been provided here. So depending on the output, you go across the granular layer within the same. So team, any queries on the web activity? And we'll discuss web activity in detail, since that's the common activity that we need for automation aspect to trigger the REST APIs and other aspects. Post the web activity, there is invoke pipeline activity. Now, as the name suggests, invoke pipeline activity, imagine that there is a restriction of 40 activity per 80 activity per pipeline. Or you have some another pipeline that you want to trigger post completion of this pipeline or this particular flow. So in that case, there is invoke pipeline that you can trigger. Wherein what this would do is, now what is this legacy and this new one? In case of legacy, correct, you could only trigger the pipelines that were a part of the existing workspace itself. Meaning, imagine that I am creating this pipeline in this workspace, then I can only go and trigger other pipelines that are present within this workspace itself. But now with this invoke pipeline, now I can even trigger pipelines that are part of different workspaces, or I can even trigger Azure Data Factory or Synapse pipelines for end-to-end integration between ADF, Synapse, and Fabric data pipelines. So now I want to trigger a pipeline from here. Now, if you see, it is providing me that these are the different parameters that are part of this pipeline. So do I pass the default values or do I add the dynamic content? Meaning, imagine that if I want the output of this to be passed as a parameter value within another pipeline, I can use the dynamic content and pass the parameters. So this is how you invoke pipelines across different workspaces and create a proper dependency between multiple pipelines via the invoke pipeline activity. Now, what does this parameter or setting here define? Wait on completion. See, this is an activity, correct? Now this activity in turn is calling another pipeline. Now let's say that post this activity, I have another activity, let's say called get metadata activity that we'll discuss in some time. Now imagine that this invoke pipeline activity is in turn calling another pipeline. That another pipeline might take 15 to 20 minutes for its own execution. Correct? So there might be a scene wherein you want to proceed to the next activity irrespective of whether the previous pipeline that was executed has got completed or not. Whereas in certain cases, we want to proceed to the next activity if and only if the pipeline that you triggered from this activity has got completed. So in that case, it is this wait on completion. Wait on completion is not check the status of this activity. Wait for the status of this activity till the time its successor that it is calling has got completed or not. But imagine if this property is disabled, it means you are triggering the pipeline. The triggering pipeline mechanism was successful. It would consider it as done and it would proceed ahead, irrespective of waiting for the other pipeline to get completed. So that is the property of wait. That is what this setting of wait on completion does. Any queries? Now, coming to the next major one, that is the get metadata. As the name suggests, it is to get the metadata of something. Now, what is that something? Let me go and so it provides different. Okay, sorry, my fault. It provides different types of sources for get metadata. Not all the sources that are supported in general in copy activity are supported in get metadata activity. So it supports majorly databases and file systems, if you all see. Correct? So what does that mean? Now let's take a look on the same. So for now, let me go ahead and select a storage account. Correct? In the storage account, let me browse to a folder. So there is a shortcut folder. Within that shortcut folder, I have these many files. Correct? But now if you see the file path that I have selected is at the folder level itself. Now, there is something called as field list. What different metadata do I want to get from the folder? So I want to get the list of all child items that are present within the folder. What do I mean by child items? All the objects that are present within the folder. Then I want to get when that folder was last modified, and I want to get the item name, the item type. Now, exists. What does this do? It checks whether that corresponding path exists or not. So that will take a look a couple of minutes later. So now, in case if I execute this pipeline, so what I'm doing is I'm trying to get these many metadata properties of that corresponding folder. So now in case if I check the output, you can see that the folder was last modified on this time, on 7th June. The item name or the folder name is shortcut and it is of type folder, not a specific file. And these are the different child items, meaning within that folder, I have a subfolder. Correct, which is this copy activity logs, which is of type folder. I have different files. So in case if I want to get the list of all files within that folder, it does not provide me in one instance itself. If you see, I got the list of files, but I also got a folder. Then again, I have to iterate over that path and then get the subsequent files within that. Meaning The get metadata activity does not provide the recursive files that are present within the folder. It provides the first layer of the folder itself, meaning either the file items or the folder items. So imagine that if you want the list of all the files that are present within subfolders, etc., you have to then iterate. First, get the list of all folders within the base folder, then iterate over that subsequent folders and get the list of all child items and append it within the append variable activity. So now I hope you all are able to understand the significance of other activities, the for each, append variable, because of different practical use cases that comes in. Imagine that if I want the list of all files that are present within the folder. In this case, where this normal get metadata activity, I'm not able to get all files, correct? I'm able to get the folder. So this is how you would be iterating over different aspects. So now this was with respect to the folder level. But imagine that if the folder path does not exist, meaning let's say I name the file path as shortcuts, and there is no such path as shortcuts. The folder name was shortcut and not shortcuts. So in that case, the get metadata activity would fail. It would fail, stating that the remote server returned not found because there is no such path. But imagine that, let's say that in the practical scenario, I want to check whether the corresponding file that I have has arrived or not, that I need. Correct? So I have to check whether that file is present or not. So before I go to the does not exist, let me first explain at a file level. And then we would go on if that file does not exist, how to handle that. So now let's take a scenario, Iris Parquet. I want to get all the details of this file. So now if you see, some additional arguments would be available, like what is the size of that file? What is the content MD file of that file? Correct? So corresponding to a file, I get some additional properties like the content of that file and what is the size of that file, some additional metadata. So now in case if I go and check, it states that this is of type Parquet. It's a file. The size of that file is 2446. So in this case, I'm able to capture all the metadata of the corresponding file. Now let's imagine that I do not have that corresponding file. It's Iris 1 file. Now in this case also this would be this would fail, stating that not found error. By the time this is getting executed, let's cover some of the other activities. Correct? If conditional, these are conditional activities. If you want to filter out certain data, you use filter activities. Correct? These all you can go to the Microsoft documentation. And in case if you want me to explain any specific activity in detail, do inform me before tomorrow's session and we can cover that. And these are the activities for notification aspect. That is either provide the message in a Teams channel or a Teams chat and send a mail in the corresponding Outlook. And notebook activity is the one that would cover in detail once we understand the notebook concept. So now here, if you see, it failed that the file does not exist, not found. So in that case, what we can do is there is an option whether it exists or not, this property. So what this does is it checks whether at that corresponding folder or that file in case of file system exists or not. So in this scenario, imagine that you want to keep on checking whether a file has arrived or not. What you can do is you can provide it in the get metadata activity and check the output. The output is false. It means that, and then you can use if else condition, if else activity. If activity get metadata dot output dot exists is false, let me use if activity. Now within if activity, I'll have to use a condition, and that condition would be, and it needs to be a Boolean output, correct? So get metadata activity dot output dot exists, correct? If this output is false, then within true and false, within false, I have to add some other activity. Let's say a fail activity, that file does not exist, no file found. And in case of true activity, true, then I can add the respective flow as well. So in this way, I can check whether a file or that corresponding folder has been created or is present, and then accordingly proceed with my flow. This is the use of get metadata activity. So if you see, what happened is it was not present. Hence the output was fail, and within fail condition, the output was false, and within false, I had set up a fail activity. So now let me correct the file name iris. So now in this scenario, that is exists would be true, and it would skip the fail activity condition within the if activity because it would go the true route. So any queries up till now? So if you see, it went into if condition activity. Since if condition activity was true, because get metadata activity output dot exists was true, because the file exists. Hence, it went to the if condition. The case was true, and within true there is no activity. Hence, it bypassed the if condition. Now, within the get metadata activity, we also have databases. Now, what does that do? If you saw, there was a connection type. This is of Azure SQL database. Since my database is of type serverless, if you'll remember, create an Azure serverless database. It remains in pause state as long as there is no activity that has been associated with that. Hence, now the database is trying to resume back. So it takes a couple of minutes for it to resume. So it's this database. So it takes a couple of minutes for it to resume it. So let's wait for a couple of minutes. But in the field list corresponding to the database, These are the different aspects, meaning whether that table exists within the database or not, what are the count of columns that are present, and what is the structure of that corresponding table. So these are the aspects with respect to the database as a get metadata aspect. So any queries up till now?
No.
Yes or no?
No, Nandan.
The database is still resuming, hence I'm unable. It's now it should have resumed. Okay, let me enter it manually. The tables dbo.test, correct? So it is dbo.test. Now in case if I execute this pipeline, it would give me the corresponding details of that corresponding table. So get metadata activity, as the name suggests, is there to provide the metadata of your objects. So get metadata 2 was successful. If you see, it provided me the structure, correct? It contains column 1, C1 of type integer, column 2 of type integer. Then whether it exists, that table exists true, and it contains 2 columns. Now my question is, would it provide me the view names, the structure of the view names in the get metadata activity? Yes or no?
I don't think so. No.
What about others? Any thoughts, guess? Doesn't view also contain the columns? Doesn't view also contain a structure?
It's contained, but it doesn't save in the DB. Means
Okay, let's test this out. Get metadata 2 was successful. And if you check, let me query the output, correct? Parent product category name, parent product category name, parent product category ID. Parent product category name, product category name, and product category ID. And it is providing me the respective column names, correct? And it is also providing me that it contains 3 columns, because irrespective of whether it is a table or a view, it does come under select all from information underscore schema dot tables, correct? Even views are present as a part of information. View is like a logical table, correct? So it is part of table, so it would also have its own set of metadata. So get metadata activity provides the metadata of tables as well as views. Clear? Because basically what it does is it indirectly goes across the information schema.table route. And if your view is present in this list, meaning it would be present in that list as well. Am I clear? So this concludes the different set of major activities that are present except data flow and notebook activity, which would cover in the subsequent aspect. All other activities are simple activities that you all can take a look in your own time, and do reach out by tomorrow in case if you want me to explain any other activity in detail. Now there's some limitations pertaining to the activities that is properly documented in the Microsoft Docs that you all can go through. Now the only thing that remains in the pipelines is how to trigger the dynamic triggers, the event-based trigger for the pipelines that we will take a look in the next session, and the concept of gateways that we would take a look in the coming weekend. Now, the next aspect that we would be covering is the Copilot experience within the data pipeline. Now, in order for me to leverage a Copilot, the minimum aspect is I need to use a dedicated fabric capacity. And it need not be F64. Earlier, there was a limitation of F64, but now even F2 capacity can be leveraged for leveraging Copilot. That the restriction of F64 has been removed. So I already have a workspace called Copilot, in which I have enabled the fabric capacity. Under the workspace setting, if you see the license info, it is the DataSharks Copilot capacity that I'm leveraging, and I've resumed it. So now I can go and work on my Copilot aspect. So let me create a data pipeline first, a blank data pipeline. Now, what is a Copilot? Copilot is basically a generative AI tool, correct? So Copilot in the data pipeline basically provides AI capability for users to effortlessly first create complex data pipelines, efficiently troubleshoot error messages, and easily understand the complex data pipelines that have been developed by others. So Copilot in data pipelines those 3 use cases. And eventually there are more. Microsoft keeps on enhancing the Copilot aspect, correct? But as of today, it is 3, and recently one has got added, which is to add descriptions to the activities. But the 3 major are to create pipelines, to troubleshoot error messages, and to summarize the existing pipeline itself. So for now, let me first start with creating a pipeline. So first click on the Copilot pane at the end that you see here. So here, I need to type certain aspect, correct? So now let's say that I want to copy the data from an Azure SQL database to a lakehouse and then send a Teams notification in case if it fails. So I have to provide certain prompts for that. So copy data from Azure SQL DB. I need not provide exact. I can provide short forms as well. Azure SQL database table, Azure SQL database to Lakehouse, and send a notification to team and trigger a fail activity in case if it fails. So now what this would do is this would go and create a copy activity and a fail activity. So if you see, it created a copy activity, and on failure, it is triggering a fail activity. But then if I click on the copy activity, the source and the destination connections are not present, correct? So here it is telling me that please provide the following missing information. So here what I need to do is I need to provide a slash, and then it would provide me a list of all the connections that I have with Azure SQL database, correct? So now I want to use this connection and I want to copy it to a lakehouse, correct? So I need to provide the lakehouse name, which is Copilot Lake. So now I'll click enter. So what it is doing is the source connection that was earlier blank, correct? Now the corresponding connection detail has been provided. But now it is asking me that within the source, the table name is empty, correct? So I have to provide the table name. So table name, let's say, what was the table name that I had? Okay, I went back, correct? For now, let's check in the drop down itself, correct? That would be much more easier for me. Sales LT dot address, correct? Sales LT dot product. So let me type it. Type is sales LT dot product. And in the lakehouse, I want to create a table of DBO dot, let's say, Copilot phase 1. So now it would automatically populate the corresponding table names. Based on the prompts that I'm providing. Now it provided the corresponding prompt, the product, correct? And in the destination also, Copilot, a table got created, correct? Now, imagine that if this activity was not present, just copy activity, it would have told me to directly execute the pipeline activity. Now there is an error because error code is required, correct? And then I provided the respective error code. So now the Copilot understood that the pipeline is proper. So now do you want to run the pipeline? I can run the pipeline. But in this case, the pipeline is getting executed now. So up till now, we are taking a look with respect to creation of a pipeline, correct? And just based on couple of prompts that it created. Okay. Now the copy activity failed. It failed because it threw because of that it then correspondingly threw an error, correct? So now the second aspect of Copilot is efficiently troubleshoot error messages. So I'm able to see the error message, but imagine there might be multiple error messages that we might not be aware of, correct? So in that time, you can leverage Copilot and help provide the error insights pertaining to that. So in that, I'm asking it to provide me more aspects with respect to this error message, and it provides that it failed due to this. It means I need to check whether this table exists in the corresponding source database or not. Check for any spelling issues, correct? Or I have the necessary permission. And then it provides me a link, Microsoft documentation link to troubleshoot such error messages that Microsoft has documented. So now the reason that it failed was, can you see the schema name is sales LT, but it took under dbo.sales LT. So this was a wrong prompt that I provided. So now in case if I run this would get executed properly. So any queries up till now on the two use cases of the Copilot? One is to create the complex pipelines, and another one is to create pipelines. It can be complex or simple, and another is to troubleshoot the error messages. Now, just to create a simple copy activity, I had to provide prompts multiple times. Correct. Now, for every prompt, basically there is some charge that is involved, and those charge aspect that we'll discuss at the end of the bootcamp holistically when we cover all the other types of Copilot experiences. But now, here I had to provide multiple prompts. Correct. So, prompt engineering is also one of the critical aspect in today's world, wherein provide a prompt. Now, if you see the copy data activity didn't had any name because I told it to create a copy activity. So it provided the default name. But better your prompt, better would be the output that you would get. So rather than me providing different prompts at different time, I can provide a proper prompt itself. Correct? Like create a copy data by the name AZ copy from the source connection name, wherein copy the table sales lt.customer to the destination connection with the container Copilot. So in that case, the copy activity that would get created would automatically have all the details, and I need not provide the next set of prompts again, thereby saving my fabric capacity utilization. So if you see, the copy activity got created by the name AZ copy. It contains the necessary source details and the necessary destination details as well. And now it is asking me to run the pipeline. So now I'm saving and running this pipeline. So in this case, better the prompt that you provide, better would be the output that would be available to you all in a quick way. Any queries up till now? So Copilot not only enhances not only the pipeline orchestration, but also the troubleshooting capacity. So using the Copilot Error Assistant, we can easily understand the errors with clear explanations and actionable contextual troubleshooting recommendation that Microsoft provided. So, any queries with respect to the initial two use cases of the Copilot within the data pipeline? Yes or no? Now,
All good.
coming to the final aspect, that is, Copilot can quickly summarize your pipeline for better understanding, which is extremely useful in collaborating scenarios involving complex data pipelines. Imagine that I came to a project, correct? And in that project, there are already multiple data pipelines that are already present. And then I need to go and understand that pipeline because unfortunately, most of the projects do not have any proper documentation. That's the normal aspect across all the IT projects, correct? So in that case, I have to manually go and check each and every activity and understand myself what has been done, correct? And within the activities, you will remember, correct? There's something called as description. As a proper initiative, ideally project should have description so that automatically I can understand what that corresponding activity is doing. But we all know that in today's aspect, developers do not follow proper sense of development and other aspect. So in that case, I have to go across each and every activity and understand what exactly it is trying to do. Correct? So in this case, I can leverage the Copilot and tell it, okay, it's because that activity is not there. Correct? Let me go and summarize this pipeline itself that we created. Correct? So now let me ask you to summarize this pipeline. Now, because that pipeline was not proper, hence it threw an error with respect to that error because of that connection missing. Now, can you see here? It automatically generated the summary of this pipeline. It states that this pipeline consists of 3 activities. As of now, it's just 3. Imagine there are n number of activities. It would also automatically provide me the list of activities. And it is telling me that it copies this. It triggers a failure in case, etc., etc. Now, imagine that summary, post summary, I have to update the pipeline description, correct? Or I have to update pipeline description. If you will remember, it is under the settings, correct? Or I have to update the activity descriptions as well. So Microsoft automatically provides the recommended descriptions, correct? So it is telling me to overwrite the existing descriptions or not. Since I do not have any description, I can click on update and it automatically added the necessary description in my corresponding activities. So imagine that you are new to the project, there are no proper aspect. So as a lead developer, it was your responsibility then to take care of that. So this would automatically take care of updating the descriptions and now update the pipeline description. Correct. Since I do not have any description, I can automatically update it or I can explicitly add it. So now in case if I do the summarize pipeline again, what does summarize pipeline do? It scans across the corresponding description, correct? In case if the description is present. If it is not present, it takes a generic understanding of what the activity does and accordingly creates a corresponding summary of the pipeline. So it provided me the corresponding description that is present across. Now imagine that if I update the description here, and now if I use the summarize the pipeline aspect again, correct? Did it take anything directly from the description? No, correct? Because even though the description is something different, it provided me a proper understanding that what the copy activity is doing. But I can override the corresponding activity descriptions again if I need it. Or I can explicitly take a copy and add it in case if I do not want to override. Unfortunately, it overrides all the activities description. So imagine if you want to update it for the specific activities, you can copy it and add it in the respective activity. Else it is all or nothing scenario. So these are the different scenarios of how one can leverage Copilot in the data pipeline experience within Microsoft Fabric. So any queries? One main aspect is post your Copilot aspect, do pause your capacity, else it would choke up your subscription cost. So any queries on the
just one question, Nandan. The functions and the all the types of different functions or variables or parameters that are system generated. Where can we get that list? Do we have somewhere in learn.microsoft.com where we can get that full list?
yes, I'll share it post the call as well.
Okay.
There's a Microsoft documentation that contains all the expressions. Correct? Give me 1 minute. Let me check. Correct? So I'm providing that in the corresponding link. So
Okay.
it's this site. This is the Microsoft Lens, that is data expressions and functions in Azure Data Factory and Azure Synapse Analytics. Now, Microsoft Fabric Data Pipeline is hosted on top of Azure Data Factory itself. So it supports everything, correct? That is present here. So if you take a look with respect to the functions and everything, it's a very long list, like the date functions, correct? The string functions.
Mm.
It provides details with respect to each and every functions. And there's an in detailed description of the same and a summary version of the same.
Okay. Thanks.
Any other queries? Now the only thing that remains in the data pipeline is the triggers. Scheduled we had seen, correct? How to event trigger a data pipeline, and then gateway. So gateway would cover at the subsequent weekend session. Tomorrow we'll complete the concept of triggers and move on to Dataflow Gen 2 and the Copilot experience in the Dataflow Gen 2. So team, any queries on the data pipelines as a whole?
No query.